Hello, I'm Douglas T. Stewart, and this is Tea for Two, number three, and we're actually out and about. We're at the Glad Cafe, and the reason we're out and about at the Glad Cafe for tea today is because Momus has a launch for a book, not a new book, but a book that's being reissued, and so it seemed like a good idea. We would come to Momus rather. Well, he made the effort of coming to Scotland, so we thought we'd come to the venue. So we're here. Welcome, Momus.
Thank you.
I guess we've known each other for 20 years, you were just
At least
saying.
20 years,
Yeah, was that, I think that was when we first met. We made a programme together called I Can See Japan.
So we were both on Creation, but we didn't really meet in the Creation years.
No, I obviously, I was aware of you, and I was sort of friends with your cousin Justin when we were teenagers, and he alerted us to the fact he had this cousin who was making these records. There was one that was versions of Jacques Brel songs, and that sort of very much appealed to me. So I was always interested in observing, and I think, strangely enough, but the time where I really felt the stronger connection with what you were doing was when you started to embrace, or you were starting to be embraced by Japan.
Yeah, well, that happened really only after I got kicked off Creation. About the same month that they signed Oasis, they dropped me, largely for personal reasons, because of the thugs coming into the office demanding where my wife was, and she was off marrying me, and then we ran off to live in Paris, and Creation couldn't really handle that pressure. But and I thought my music career was pretty much finished then, but the Japanese stepped into the breach, and I started having hits for the first time ever, but they were hits in Japan only, and you always had that strong Japanese connection too. So
yeah, it's a strange thing, and we've met in Japan when I've been over in Japan playing, and I would say there is common ground between what we do, but there's also a lot of differences. And I don't really know. I wonder if you have any insight why you think Japan particularly connected with what you do, or with what I do.
Japan, notoriously, people are big in Japan who are not big anywhere else, and I mean, there's that funny Tom Waits song about that, and I don't know. It's a mystery to me, really, because especially my material, it's very wordy, and the English language is not well understood in Japan, and yet these songs were hits. I think I explain it with all this fancy kind of lingo about super legitimacy or orthopraxy or whatever it is, that the Japanese, when something's fashionable and when it's being mediated to them by a sort of acknowledged expert. In my case, this was Keigo Oyamada of Cornelius and of Flippers Guitar, who was a big pop star in the early 90s, and who was really into the L label and the Creation label. He loved Primal Scream better than he loved my records, but he also loved my records. And he had a radio show, and he had lots of press coverage, so he would just basically force feed my material to the Japanese public, and mostly a teenage girl public as well. So.
Yeah, and one thing I do think is, we were sort of talking about very often when I'm writing songs, I think we have quite a lot of, a high percentage, I would say, of female fans come to see BMX Bandits concerts and have bought our records over the years, compared to a lot of my friends' bands. And I think somehow there's a sort of teenage girl dreaming of the perfect love in me, and that comes through my songs. And I guess at that period, you found yourself writing songs as this female character.
Yeah, that's what happened. It wasn't Kahimi first, it was an artist called The Poison Girlfriend, and there were other people like Mari Hamada, who's an actress, and so I was sort of a songwriter in demand, making these sort of dreamy songs, which were my idea of which actually is not what real women are like at all. Real women can be bloody-minded and quite tough, and especially actresses and singers are very ambitious. But in a way, in Japan, and this might be an element of the sexual politics of Japan, that women are supposed to be very demure and very passive. They're actually not, and they have very clever ways around that, and they're very bossy, and they control the finances of the household and all the rest of it. But they are very good at playing this role. So I think my delusions about what Japanese women were like actually rather suited then to play up to. But it was all, with Kahimi especially, it was all mixed up with Serge Gainsbourg and the 60s pop thing, what was happening in France when Serge Gainsbourg... You see that whole thing about Serge Gainsbourg writing for France Gall about Les Sucettes and all the rest of it, and she had no idea it was about oral sex. I don't believe for a minute she had no idea it was about oral sex, but she played up to this role because women are not supposed to know about that kind of thing, or it's funnier if she didn't know
her
about
character is she's the innocent.
Yes, it was just totally a role she was playing, yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting because for me, that fits into Japan quite a lot, because when we think of Japanese music, I think, or a lot of people, when they think about Japanese music from the West, they think of a form of music that's actually more Chinese. And it's like which isn't Japanese at all, but it's a sort of American or Western view of what Japanese music. But they embraced that and then almost claimed it as their own, and sort of, I think, also celebrated it. And so I guess the notion of they quite like almost that the presentation of a kind of fantasy version of their own culture.
The weirdest example of that for me is Japan's Tin Drum album, which is mostly Chinese music, and it's got titles like Canton and stuff, and yet the band is called Japan, and they've got, Sakamoto starts collaborating with David Sylvian and all the rest of it, and then comes up with, I think it was Sakamoto, I'm not sure, came up with this term bamboo music, which was a self-conscious Asian music, a pan-Asian music, designed, packaged for the West. So it was playing up to the stereotypes we had. Well, we do mix up China and Japan. It's taken me a long time to realize what is specifically Japanese folk music, the Ondo Matsuri music, which you hear in August especially, which I love, and I've been sampling a lot in my last few albums. Kind of stopped now because I moved back to Europe, but...
a lot of the kind of music that the guys who were involved in the Yellow Magic Orchestra and before then definitely has that thing of a kind of mock Japanese.
They're picking up on our perceptions of their music, and that's very Japanese in a way. They're fascinated by how others see them, and I mean, every country does this to some extent, because tourists in a way define your national image as it's packaged and presented to tourists, obviously.
Well, I think that's quite a good point to talk about your current book, because I guess there's an aspect of that, and also I guess in our culture, tartan's one of the things that define us, which was made by an Italian.
Was it? This is news to me.
Yeah, an Italian Victorian businessman apparently invented our recent... No Stewarts were running around wearing this. It was designed...
They had plaids, though.
Yeah, they had plaids, but they were based on...
colours.
But he kind of generated this whole fashion of tartans as we have them now. And I'm pretty sure he was Italian. But anyway, to the book, the Book of Scotland's...
This is not a new book, it's a new edition of an old book which I wrote in 2009, and it's sort of series of scenarios about Scotland's... I mean, I was thinking in terms of the 2014 referendum. No, actually, I couldn't have been, but I knew there was going to be an independence referendum at some point. I don't think it had been scheduled in 2009. But now it's a post-referendum... The football has been kicked a little bit into the long grass, but it's still an issue in Scotland, so it still seems relevant. And it's, I think it's quite funny. I was rereading it. I always forget the things I've written, and then I reread them as if someone else had written it. So I think it's quite amusing.
I mean, humour's always... It's funny, because I still think a lot of people, when they detect humour in art, they have a bit of knee-jerk reaction of, that's not got much worth because it's humour. But humour, again, has always been something that you've very much embraced and used.
Yeah, I'm not like a David Sylvian character who takes himself very seriously, although I like that kind of artist as well.
Yeah.
But I tend to want to play around and make fun of people, or make fun of myself especially. I think maturity is like you go through a lot of awful stuff when you're an adolescent and in your early 20s, and then you kind of get a certain distance from it, and you realise it was funny in retrospect. And I was just passing the girl I was trying to make all my teens, who actually lived. She was an art student at Glasgow School of Art, and I passed lodgings she used to live in, and I remembered very clearly 1979, being 19 years old and being a virgin, coming up to visit her here, and David Bowie's Boys Keep Swinging came on the radio, and she's like, oh, I don't like this song, it's all black boys, you know, it's really sexist, and I was trying to explain it was kind of ironic and tongue-in-cheek, and she wasn't buying that, and it just was all like yesterday. I suddenly remembered it all, but I remembered that rather pungent and rather beautiful misery that I had of not being able to sleep with her, and you know, and now we're both kind of old people.
Beautiful misery is a funny thing, and it's a phrase that I sort of nicked when I heard Keith Richards talking about Graham Parsons, and he said, yeah, he had a kind of beautiful misery or a beautiful sadness, man. Yeah. And I liked it, and I instantly kept referring to it about the
people
kind of
love that. I mean,
sadness.
that's why Radiohead is so huge. I mean, people love that constant melancholia. And you can't really laugh at the same time as feeling that sentimentality. So, I don't know, I do write sad songs too. There's one on my new album, one quite sad song, but it's actually just a cut-up list of detective story titles, novel titles by Len Dayton and Agatha Christie and Patricia Highsmith. But somehow it's very moving, and people have been writing comments under it saying, you know, I was crying when I heard this, and it's just cut up.
Are you a fan of mysteries? Because I am a little bit. That's one of my things I find slightly helps me detangle all the tangles in my head is Agatha Christie mysteries, and I'll reread them and rewatch them and rewatch them.
I've got really much more into that stuff. I've got huge respect now for Agatha Christie, which I wouldn't have had when I was younger, and the Paul Temple mysteries on BBC Radio 4 Extra, but also things like Sherlock Holmes. I'm a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. I like his kind of autistic detachment and this purely cerebral, but actually he's very passionate about you know, just the lure of the chase and the yeah.
There's one I funnily enough, last night I was on Twitter, and Edgar Wright, the film director who I guess first came to notice through making the TV show Space, was listing his favourite movies. And I just thought, oh, I'll have a little look and see what he's listing. I bet there's a few things that we probably both would like. We're similar sort of ages and things. And one of the ones which I didn't expect to see, I never see people mention, a murder mystery called The Last of Sheila. Are you aware of that?
No.
It was written by Stephen Sondheim and Anthony Perkins. And it's the only screenplay both of them wrote. And all of the suspects and victims are all based on real friends of theirs from Hollywood. One, Richard Benjamin, plays a sort of version of Anthony Perkins, and Raka Welsh plays a version of herself, but was told she was playing a different actress because they thought she wouldn't want to do it. And I think I would recommend it. And I got to meet Mr. Sondheim, and I said about loving that, and he was bowled over, and he was so happy because he was going, no one ever asked me about that. They always ask about the musicals, and particularly West Side Story, which he was only the lyricist. So my tip would be looking out The Last of Sheila, because I think it's a really, you can tell the people who wrote it are obsessives, and there's clues almost in every second of it.
I'll tell you one I really like, it's Daphne du Maurier, is it Daphne du Maurier, the Lord Peter Wimsey and all that stuff?
No, Dorothy L. Sayers.
Dorothy L. Sayers,
I'm a fan of
like
du
the
Maurier,
6 Red Herrings, which is set in Scotland, and it's about 6 painters who, you know, one of them is the murderer. And what I love about that structure is that it sets up parallel worlds where, you know, each alibi and each kind of suspect's potential criminal acts is examined one by one. You're never sure which one is going to be the one, but it almost doesn't matter. I mean, the resolution almost doesn't matter. This is the thing about the Paul Temple ones as well, because they're so complex. They're actually really, there's no way you could mentally keep hold of all those threads in your mind. And I'm sure that Francis Durbridge, who wrote those, he didn't really know how it was going to resolve in the end. He had to make 8 episodes for each adventure. He just kept complicating things and making new characters, and then at the end, Paul Temple mansplains it to his wife Steve. You know, instead of she's got her female intuition, but she doesn't. She's always saying, "Oh, explain this to me, please."
Dorothy L. Sayers, one of the things I like about her Lord Peter Wimsey things, in a bunch of the books, it has the mystery, which ticks boxes for me, but it also has Lord Peter Wimsey's at first very much unrequited love for this Harriet Vane character, and that's a big...
I kind of hate that when Harriet Vane comes in, because that's really obviously Dorothy L. Sayers herself trying to have sex with her own character. I think it gets a bit sticky.
Yeah.
I like the ones where Harriet Vane is not.
See, but I guess one would expect me to like that stuff. But anyway, the next thing, I brought an object that I thought might be interesting to talk about. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a DVD of Jonathan
this is great. I love
Miller's
this. It's fantastic.
Alice in Wonderland, and it's a funny thing when you know people, even though you haven't discussed it, you sort of think, I bet Nick would like this.
Yeah, no, I adore this. It's very atmospheric. It's got this amazing Ravi Shankar music, which you wouldn't expect to be the soundtrack.
1966.
Yeah, it's the pure sort of LSD period of British culture, and it's actually, I'm writing a book just now for a big American publisher, Farrell Straus Giroux, giving me a big advance to write my autobiography, essentially, and it's called Drugs. But I've never done drugs. That's the funny thing. I'm notorious, as you probably saw in the Creation book that David Kavanagh wrote. I'm sort of notorious for not ever having done drugs.
Me too.
So
serious drugs.
And yeah, serious drugs. That's right, of course. And it's kind of funny to write it, because in a way we've been surrounded. We've done second-hand drugs. We've done air drugs, as Sarah Cracknell used to put it. You know, you were sort of in an environment of total acid and speed and all these things, and you knew what the feeling of those drugs was, even if you didn't take them. So this is what my book's about. It's about second-hand drug experience. It's
got an amazing cast, like people like Peter Sellers.
This is so druggy, but the original novel is so druggy as well, with all the eat me, drink me stuff, and it is very, very. I don't know what Lewis Carroll was on, but he was definitely on something.
It's also, and there's nothing overtly sexual about it, but it's incredibly sensual.
Yeah. Well, that sense of what summer. If you're old like us, you can remember 1966 and the summers in the 60s and what they felt like, and it does have that, although it's Victorian. But it's got this beautiful, there's the scene where they're all dancing on the shore and stuff. And, It's
funny because the bits you were talking about summer, I almost wondered if, I think it's Peter Weir that made Picnic at Hanging Rock. There's a similar element of how the summer's portrayed in the girls lying back in the grass, and it's got a similar type of, not overt but real kind of sensuality about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a wonderful thing, and I think it's incredible for the time as well.
Yeah, he's very underrated as a director. He's known as a comedian, or the guy who would just do this on television, sort of lie back and pontificate. And he's still alive.
Oh,
but he seems a bit forgotten as a director.
Whistle and I'll come to you.
Whistle Down the Wind. Yeah, Whistle I'll Come to You. That's also fantastic. Really one of the most scary things that's ever.
And incredibly out there, because it has Michael Hordern at times just going and not actually any proper dialogue.
It's terrifying. Yeah.
But I'm glad that my suspicion was confirmed.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I actually almost brought an Ivor Cutler book with me, but I couldn't find it. So I brought this one.
Oh yeah.
And but I'm pleased to say, but my ex had a version of it where all of the root bits were covered up with black rectangles.
Okay.
I guess true to complaints, but this is the uncensored version of a Jeff Koons book, and these books were almost as important to records to me. I guess a lot of art books when they came along, particularly a lot of these books were very affordable. Like you could get a beautiful book about Gilbert and George or Jeff Koons or other artists, and it would take you into a different world of ideas. And obviously you have a big connection because Stars Forever, one of the songs was commissioned, was it by Jeff Koons himself?
We kind of said that at the time, but in fact I just knew one of his assistants, and so we sort of got this deal where Jeff Koons didn't pay for that song. I got to meet Jeff Koons on the HMS Endeavour, I think it's called, which is a battleship that's moored off New York, and there was a Vanessa Beecroft installation on the deck with sailors sort of doing performance, and Jeff Koons was there, and I just went up to him, and he was very polite, and he did know who I was, and he was like, oh yes, I really like the song, and he said, everyone out on the internet's talking about you, Momus. He was sort of acting as if I was the celebrity and he wasn't. Very polite and sort of affable, but a little distant as well. I don't know. I'm not sure. I have very mixed feelings about his work, a bit like Damien Hirst. It's that it now looks kind of dated, and it looks very opportunistic in that 80s way. I mean, I loved the ushering in banality adverts he took and all that. There's a certain calculated quality to it, which is almost Brechtian, but it's on the other side politically. It's all about being the ultimate salesman, which he is. He's very good.
It's funny. I mean, at the time, I did find very excited. It felt, I guess, like it was taking the Warhol thing to another.
Yeah, it's neo-pop art, and I think that's all looking a bit tired now. Takashi Murakami, Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, they were all reviving the Warholian strategies, and it's now a little bit played out, I think.
Do you think there will be a time where it will seem, sometimes things become a bit tired and then they suddenly seem much more interesting
I
again?
think we're living through a really interesting time, which is the end of the neoliberal consensus, which looked as if it was going to be around forever, but that 30-year period from Thatcher and Reagan onwards looked like it was really securely entrenched. The end of history was how Francis Fukuyama called it. But actually, we've come with populism and this kind of resurgent fascism. Unfortunately, what we hated about neoliberalism now begins to look rather civilized and nice. All the sort of globalism and the multiculturalism that came with it in the 90s is now like a vanished age. So this neo-populist thing is... so now these artists who were the artists of the neoliberal consensus are kind of suddenly maybe rather kinder looking, because they're not saying go home immigrants, they're actually saying it's great to buy things, it's great to have money, it's very materialist in that Madonna sense of being material girls. They're all material girls and they're into sex and stuff, so actually it doesn't look so evil now as it did to us sort of proto-Marxists back then.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I want to ask you, because of your the book you're here to, as I say, it's not or as you were saying, it's not a new book, but it's being relaunched. It's about different versions of Scotland, and as someone who very much doesn't live in Scotland and has been almost, I guess, celebrated and embraced more in other places, how Scottish do you feel? How much do you feel Scottish is part of your identity, or?
Yeah, it is very strong. And I think you have to sort it out in your head when you do live abroad, when you do go into exile. Am I British? Am I Scottish? Am I European? And it's like Russian dolls. I feel like I've got this outer identity of being a European. So I'm living in Berlin, which is becoming the capital of Europe, essentially. And then I've got, within that, there's an identity of being British. But that's now, it's very like eggshells. It's very damaged. And Brexit is damaging the whole idea. And also the independence referendum in 2014, whenever it was. So that inner shell, that inner doll is sort of collapsing. And the Scottish thing is the very inner... Or Edinburgh, I suppose it comes down to cities as well. I'm an Edinburgh person, and this is where we're on different sides of the barrier, because you're West Coast. I mean, my family came from the West Coast, but we became Edinburgh people, so all the stereotypes of that 40-mile difference start to apply. It's really interesting how you start to how you define that with the greater entities around you. And I mean, my ideal is that Scotland would be a European nation and separate from England and independent, which I think it will, because young people seem to feel that as well. So I think that's what will happen 20 years down the line. I think it'll take a while.
Can you imagine feeling like Scotland was your home again, or returning to Scotland and making it your home again?
Not really. I mean, I flew in from Berlin. It was a beautiful day on Monday, sunny in Berlin, and then I flew in and there were like 8 layers of clouds to come down to Glasgow Airport. And I don't know, I feel like there is a certain freshness to the air here, and a certain there's definitely something that appeals to me here. But I don't know where would I live. Edinburgh's a bit stuffy and bourgeois, and I might like to live in the Hebrides somewhere, but that might get dull and feel like being a hermit.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know that never seemed appealing to me, but more and more it almost feels
going to the island.
That I almost can imagine sometime being pulled that way.
It is a beautiful landscape, and that's where my ancestors come from. They come from Mull mostly. So, yeah.
Well, whether you come back for good or not, it's always a pleasure to have you here when you do visit.
Thank you.
And so thank you for joining me for tea and some chat. And I think we're going to have a song to finish.
This is called Little Paper Humans, and it's from my just composed Freshest Paint album, which I made in Berlin just after getting back from Asia. Made it last month, and it's a little bit inspired by the rock opera Hair, this one, so it's got a bit of a 60s feel. And it's very sincere and from the heart, a bit like your songs.
All good.
Kind is what you need to be, but you don't know it. Mind is what we need to see, but you don't show it. Blind is what you seem to be. Grind ding dong humanity, little paper humans stretching to infinity. Living is a series of choices. Here come the voices to challenge your beliefs, placing all your truths with their lies. Blind leading sighted, open up your eyes. Blink, the situation is so tense you have to do it. You think blocking out the night will get you through it, and so you drink your future all away. Sing tomorrow for today. Little paper humans stretching to infinity. Living will continue to test you. Here come the pests who try to bless themselves, profiting from others' pain. Blind leading the sighted, open up your eyes again. Try the politics of me or be a hater. Cry your slogan by today, gay later. Free from the politics of class, we rediscover it at last. Little paper humans stretching to infinity. Solos, no? Right after mine, Ian Anderson. Living is a series of choices. Here come the voices, question your beliefs, placing all your truths with their lies. Blind leading the sighted, open up your eyes. Video, I'm kind of doing this really hippie dance with the Japanese.
Yeah. You have good limbs.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you to Momus. That was 2 for tea. I was Douglas T, and hopefully we'll have some more tea and some more chat real soon. Thank you, Momus.
I forgot to drink any tea.
I think that's
the Edinburgh style. Let's all go down to Mackey's for a wee cup of tea.